My name's Mark. What we do here at Stonebrook, sometimes I say it's weird, but it's really not weird. What we do is we talk about Jesus. Everything we do is centered around who Jesus is, what he said, what he did, the attitudes he had. We believe that Jesus reveals who God is, what God is like. We believe Jesus came to show us how to interact with God, how to interact with other people. And so what we do basically is we try to go through the various books that talk about Jesus. We're going through the book of Mark. It's taken us, it's probably 2.5 years, and we're in chapter 3. But we get distracted by other things, and we sometimes talk about certain things. You can start my clock now. I guess this counts. This goes against me. But we sometimes often talk about things that you might not hear other places, and that's why we exist, to sort of take a little different look at some things that churches seem to not talk about. Not because it's not there and not because it's not true. It's just that religion in general has formed certain beliefs and talk about certain things that maybe don't always line up with who Jesus is and what he's taught. So that's what we try to do, and that's what we've been doing the last few weeks. By the way, if you have a question at any time while we're talking, I have to turn on my clicker. You can, number one, you can just stop and say, hey, I have a question, or just blurt it out. We don't care. Or if you want to be more anonymous, you can text a question to 415-727-6257. And so many, like last week, the entire thing that we talked about, and what we'll talk about next time we're together, came from just someone asking a question. And I love questions. It's Jesus' number one way that he taught. People ask him questions, so Jesus would bring up questions. I think there's something like 87 questions that are mentioned in the 4 accounts of Jesus' life. He answered 3 of them directly. Many times he answered them with a question, because Jesus' point wasn't just to come and say, here's the way it is, write this down, do this, and you'll be fine. His point was to come and show that it's a relationship. It's just like asking a question about women. We don't know, but we're so interested in the process of finding out. We want to think, and Jesus wants us to, he wants us to think, and that's why we do what we do. I don't want to just impart information where you say, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is what we do, I'm good. It's not what it's about at all. It's about thinking through the process and getting to know God. So what we've been doing, what we've been talking about specifically, is something that is unavoidable if you're going to be a person who says, I want to know what Jesus was about, I want to be like him. We are going to come face to face over and over again with Jesus healing people. And it's something that churches avoid, churches make excuses for. So many different pastors, preachers have all kinds of different opinions on this, and they seem to always say things that don't line up with what Jesus said or did. I'm sorry, I'm not mad at him. But suffering, the things that go on in the world, horrific things, and childhood diseases, and you are affected by somebody. You may be affected yourself at the moment with some sort of malady that is causing suffering and pain in your life. And so religion seeks to explain that, and many times it comes up with answers like, well, God's trying to teach you something. God's wiser than us. He's trying to help you go through this so you can help someone else that's going through this. And Christians nod and go, yeah, that's it. No, it's not it. What is God's will and what God wants and the way God thinks is exactly like Jesus. And every single person that approached Jesus seeking for physical healing was healed. And that's something that I can't just ignore, not look at and say, oh, we're going to talk about Jesus, but he healed all these people and we can't discuss it. No, we have to discuss that. And I think, and I'm not approaching this, and I've said this before, and I know I reiterate some things maybe too many times, but I want us to really get this. I'm not approaching this from the standpoint of I know everything about this, or I've got it all together, or I function this way all the time. But I am approaching it from, this is really, really interesting to me. I look at Jesus and I constantly go, or what the, whatever word you choose to put there. What in the world is this? And when I see Jesus interacting with people, he always, if Jesus is the will of God, he always fixed suffering in people's lives. He always brought them to it. He never said, well, you know, God's trying to teach you something with this. There's a spiritual thing God's trying to work out in you. You know, God sometimes wants to do something in you before he does something for you. Doesn't that sound really cool? Doesn't that sound like that comes directly from God? I see that posted all the time. And you get 1,467 responses of amen or, yeah, that's good. Jesus never said it. Maybe it's true. I don't know. It never happened in the ministry of Jesus, and that's what we're studying about. So Jesus said to pray this prayer, may your will, talking about God, and I'm going to go over some things that we've gone through before, but there'll always be something new that I pick up. It's sort of, this is a stupid illustration. I recently bush hogged my pasture. Anybody here ever bush hog? Okay. When you bush hog with a bush hog that maybe doesn't work perfectly well, there's always parts that, even though you went over it, there's still grass sticking up. And I'm a little bit OCD, and so I have to go back again over those areas and get them. So that's what we have to do sometimes in church. We have to bush hog again. It's a stupid illustration. But Jesus said, may your will, talking about God, be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we said there's three things we can learn from this. God's will is not currently being done on the earth if Jesus is right. So we can't look to what happens, and this is what Christians do all the time. That everything happens for a reason. It's not in the Bible. But there's something, the reason that happened is God is working something out on you. And they look at, well, I guess God didn't want me to have that because I don't have that. But Jesus simply said that that's not a good way to determine what God's will is. Also, there's no difference between God's will in heaven and God's will on earth. Every Christian that I know, if you ask them, okay, here's a guy and he's blind. When he gets to heaven, will he be able to see? Yes. Why? Because that's God's will. Well, God's will isn't different on the earth than it is in heaven. I don't make the rules. God seems to need partnership, and this is the part that is interesting to me and sometimes difficult to get across. God seems to need partnership for his will to be enacted or manifested on earth. He needs somebody to connect with him. So the question then becomes, what is God's will? Over and over and over, I say God's will is Jesus. He's the personification of God's will. That's what I look at, not the circumstances of life. I look at Jesus to determine what God's will is. And Jesus, over and over and over, seems to use this word faith, and it's a weird word, and I've been in lots of different churches, lots of different streams, maybe, of Christianity. I had the idea this morning, I need to write a book someday about the different streams I've been in and call it EX streams, extremes. That'd be good. That's a good idea. But now don't steal my idea. Or is that book? Maybe that book already exists. When you get bored a little bit later, Google that. Let me know. But Jesus always talks about faith. And here's a statement I've made. Faith begins where the will of God is known. Too many people are looking at their lives or the situation in the world to see that must be God's will. And so these are some of the main things I'm trying to get across, is that you can't look at that to determine God's will. If you don't know what God's will is, you aren't in faith about anything. And what is faith? People have sought to figure out, define what faith is. Last time we were together, I defined faith simply this way. Faith equals connection. And we'll see through these various stories, and that's what I'm trying to get across, is that God has things that he wants to happen. And we use the illustration of maybe, and to me this is a better illustration than the bush hog, that if you're in the military and you're in a war situation, the commanders, the general, whoever, has certain things that they want to accomplish. And in the middle of that, they are sending transmissions, or they have a game plan, or they have, this is supposed to go here. Well, things go awry because there's opposition to them. There's an enemy. And so sometimes all I can think of is Forrest Gump, where they were calling in strikes, and they had to talk to them over the radio. Well, that's very similar. People talk about prayer, and they think prayer is trying to get God to do something. And I want to show you that it seems like Jesus is saying God has already done something. He's a certain way. You just have to make some sort of connection. There's certainly opposition to that transmission getting to you. Same thing, if you're on the wrong frequency, or if the frequency is being jammed in wartime, let's say you're military, and, well, it's not because the will of the person that's leading you has changed. You're simply not making connection at this moment. So you may not even know what's going on, or you may think, well, I'm asking for this and I'm not getting it, so maybe he doesn't want it. Nobody thinks that on the battlefield. Well, maybe all the generals went home and they decided this war, they're just leaving us out here. No, there's some sort of connection that's not happening. Now, one of Jesus' closest apostles, his followers, said this: God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Ghost and power. This is one of those cult-like things that we do. Would you mind to just say power with me? Power. And we use the illustration of electric before, that if this chair was electrified, that there's power there. It's just sitting there. It's just like the receptacle in your house. It's potential. It has potential to do good, but you have to somehow connect it. There are certain things that cause the electricity to flow better. There are certain things that resist it. If I hit this electric with a 2x4, nothing would happen. But if I hit it with copper, or like gold is actually a better conductor than copper. The price of copper, they might as well use gold now. But there's power there. It's potential, but it's not doing anything until the connection is made. But God anointed Jesus with the Holy Spirit and with power, and he went about doing good and healing. What's that next word? Oh. See, he healed all. Over and over. So what do I do with that? I can't say God's trying to teach you something if he healed all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. And this is another thing written about him, but I'm trying real quickly to go over this. In Jerusalem, Idumea, from east of the Jordan, the news about his miracles had spread far and wide. The news, people began to hear about it, and vast numbers of people came to see him. He had healed many people that day, so all the sick people eagerly pushed forward to touch him. Oh, okay. They wanted to touch him over and over and over. People were trying to touch him. Then we went through this story, and I'm quickly going over some things that we talk about, where Jesus is walking on the water, which is kind of weird in itself. And so Peter says, hey, I want to do that. And Jesus said, oh, you can't do that. This is just for people named Jesus. No, he said, sure. Jesus is always showing what God's will is. God's standard posture is, yes, sure. Yeah, anything I can do, you can do. And that blows our mind. We don't believe it. Jesus over and over and over said, the things I do, you can do. And he said, yes, come. So Peter went over the side of the boat and he walked on the freaking water. Freaking is in the Greek. You have to look closely. He walked on the water toward Jesus. Okay? This is strange. I know Jesus can walk on the water, but here's just a regular dude walking on the water. This is where I always ask, and just to review, is it at that point, is it God's will for Peter to walk on the water? Yes. How do we know? Number one, he said it's his will. Number two, he's walking on the water. This is where, don't make the Bible overly complicated. He's walking on the water. It's not something you can just do by yourself. Here's the problem. But, when he, Peter, saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Is it now God's will for Peter to walk on the water? Yes. Yeah, it is. And this is what I'm trying to get across, is that God's will, number one, isn't determined by what's happening. Number two, God's will isn't the determining factor if it will happen in the first place or continually. Number three, I should have written these down. These are good points. Number three, a person then could be connected, he was looking at Jesus, could be connected partnered with God and supernatural things happening, yet at another time not be connected with God and the supernatural things not happening. Now, what we usually do is say, why God? What did God do? What did God didn't do? We put the hinge swinging on God, when it seems like so many times it's more determined by us. Jesus immediately reached out, said, you have so little faith. This always bothered me. I would have said, excuse me, I just walked on the water. That took something. You see all those 11 guys in the boat? They didn't do anything. It's interesting to me that the interaction that Jesus had was with the person that actually took a step. You can only coach somebody that's doing something. Anyway, he said, why do you have so little faith? Why did you doubt me? And we went through this thing about what that word doubt is. Actually means, why did you change? We went through the whole thing where if you're double-minded, D-O-U-B, double, D-O-U-B, doubt, simply means to change. He thought at the beginning, I can walk on the water. There's Jesus. He's doing it. Everything else he said comes to pass. Sure, I can walk on the water. But then he saw the winds and the waves, and he thought, I can't walk on the water. What in the world am I doing? And that's simply the thing that we go through being humans on the earth. Doesn't make Peter bad, but Jesus is simply saying, why did you change? And we'll see that. The reason I brought all these things up again is because hopefully we'll get two stories that illustrate this further. Whether or not we receive from God what we need depends more on us than it does on God. Then we have things like this that it said. When the people recognized Jesus, the news of his arrival spread. Soon people were bringing all their sick to be healed. They begged him to let the sick do what? Touch at least the fringe of his robe. And all who touched him were healed. And we went through the whole thing that the fringe of his robe, there's the last prophecy in Malachi concerning a coming Messiah says the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings. In the original Hebrew, that word wings is outer garments. He'll have healing in his outer garments. And they begin to see this is the person that was promised. And so if I can just get to him and touch him, there's healing there. Okay, Jesus also said this. Well, he didn't actually say this. Mark said this. And because of their unbelief, this is when he was in his hometown, because of their unbelief, he couldn't do any miracles. Christians will always say, well, there's nothing that God can't do. And they're always faced with this sort of paradox where they believe that God is someone that can do anything. He's all powerful. Is God all powerful? Yes. Can God do anything he wants? Yes. Number one, the Bible says no. Don't mind the Bible. You have your beliefs about God. Why do we care about the Bible? So, God can do anything he wants. Well, then is God all loving? Yes, God is all loving. So that has to mean that either one of those statements has to not be true. If God is all loving and he can do anything he wants, then of necessity, he must not want suffering to go. Or he can't do anything about it. And that's one reason we talk about these things. I don't believe that false dichotomy is truth, but there are some things, and I've explained this the last few times we were here, God, when we say God is all powerful, this is where people start throwing stuff at you. When we say God is all powerful, it is not true in the sense that God can make anything happen he wants to. We see that multiple times in Jesus' ministry, including right here. One of the most famous is when, right before he was crucified, when he spoke over the city of Jerusalem. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how many times I wanted to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you wouldn't let me. And so now this is going to happen to you. It's an example of God in a bod, Jesus, saying, I wanted this, but I couldn't do it. Love, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is control. And God cannot control. I've talked about that before. I'll get distracted if I don't go on. Because of their unbelief, he couldn't do any miracles there. He was amazed at their unbelief. Another translation says he was amazed at their lack of faith. But then he went around teaching. Okay, I've sort of caught you up. This is where we were last time. Jesus has just healed the madman of Gadara, we call him. Guy had a bunch of demons. Jesus cast the demons out of him. He lived in the tombs, in the graveyard. Do people say graveyard anymore? Cemetery. I grew up saying graveyard. This is the time of year people think about graveyards. But he was this man in the graveyard. He cast the demons out of him, and he was sitting clothed in his right mind. They were all afraid. It made them scared. So this is really, really important. Jesus has just healed this man. This guy's been around town. Everybody knows about him. Oh yeah, he's the guy from the tombs. He's always crying. He cuts himself with stones. He's always been that way. So a guy shows up, and he's not that way anymore. He's perfectly normal, perfectly sane. He's sitting there. He has his clothes back on, and he just seems to be a normal guy. Very similar to Eric. He has all his clothes on today. He seems to be in his right mind. So their response was, "Oh no!" And the crowd began to plead with Jesus, "Go away and leave us alone." And because he's God, he says, "Well, I can do whatever I want to do. There's some more of you sick. Come up here, I'll show you." Nope. As Jesus was getting into the boat, he immediately left. God needs, desires, has to have. It's who he is. We have this Greek-Roman vision of God on a throne, white robe, white beard, very similar to me without the robe, and lightning bolts coming out of his fingers, and he can do what he wants to do. No. He's exactly like Jesus. I know I say this all the time. God is exactly like Jesus. If there's something else you think about God and it's not like Jesus, that thing that you think about God isn't correct about God. It's just not. And I don't care if you found it in the Bible. This is where, again, people throw stuff at you. But anyway, he left. They begged him to go. The man wanted to stay with him, but he said, "No, go home. Tell him they've been merciful." Eric has his clothes on, and he has a question.
Yes. Why did they, I was confused about that part. They begged him to go. He did a miraculous thing. Get out of here. Like, it doesn't make sense.
It's because you think, like so many Christians think, that a miracle would cause people to believe. See, God didn't do miracles. This is what I was taught. The reason he healed people and did miracles is to show he was divine so people would believe. Many times, no. It's not. Faith doesn't come by seeing a miracle. Their life has been interrupted. Their way of thinking about what God is like. A guy just shows up, and this is an impossible thing. Now, some of us might react, "This impossible thing has happened. That must be God." Other people react, "This is some sort of strange witchcraft." This happened in the graveyard late at night. All the pigs were destroyed. The rest of the story, the pigs ran over the hill. This is strange things happening. We don't want any part of it. We want our life just the way it is. We have our way of thinking is already set. I don't want it changed.
Is that
I don't know.
a shock against the economics of the pigs going? Was that their way of making money or no?
Well, yeah. This is actually happening. Somebody reel me in if this takes longer than necessary. Because this is happening. I don't have a map, but here is the lake, the Sea of Galilee. It's just a big lake. It flows from the Sea of Galilee, is the Jordan River comes down, it hits the Dead Sea. Okay, that's the border of Israel. Another cool thing about this is Jesus doing a miracle for people who weren't God's people. They weren't Jewish. These are Gentiles. That's why they have pigs.
Yeah, okay, got it.
They're Gentiles over here. So here this Jewish guy came over here, and all of a sudden stuff's happening. He killed all our pigs. What? I don't know. See, I don't know, but there's lots of reasons where they could go, We don't do that around here. You know? So Jesus got in the boat, went back to the other side of the lake where a large crowd gathered with him on the shore. Okay. And we went through the story, but now this is where I wanted to get. We went through it fast before. Now we'll go through it. We'll meander now. So he arrives back on the shore. Let's see. He's on this shore. So now he comes back over this side. There was a large crowd gathered around him. They're waiting for him to come back. Then a leader of the local synagogue. This man is a Pharisee because the Pharisees were the leaders of the synagogues. The Sadducees were the leaders of the temple. Jerusalem, they were in charge of the temple. The Pharisees, ultra conservative, believed every little, King James, jot and tittle, little period and punctuation, although there wasn't punctuation in the Hebrew Bible. But they followed the Hebrew Bible perfectly, exactly. And they did not like Jesus. You'll find people that follow the Bible literally and perfectly. When you talk about Jesus, constantly go away from him back to the Bible. They've exalted the Bible above God himself. That's what the Pharisees did. But this Pharisee is facing a life situation. His name was Jairus. He arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. This is a big step for a Pharisee, pleading fervently with him, "My little daughter is dying." You have to stop and feel that. If you're a parent, you can feel that. My little daughter is dying. I always think about Mother's Day where my daughter was lost on the river. And I was there till like 4 in the morning. No, I was there till the next morning when we finally figured out she was alive. But all night long on that riverbank, this feeling, my daughter is dead. The highway patrol going up and down the river, shaking their head when they go pass by me. Oh, you could feel that. So he said, "My daughter is dying." But now notice what he says. This is important. "Please come and lay your hands on her. Come touch her. Heal her so she can live." King James, if you'll lay your hands on her, she will live. Okay, that's what he says. You come lay your hands on her, she'll live. That's what he said. And Jesus said, "No. No, sometimes I'll be with you in the storm. But sometimes the cross you have to bear will lead you to a deeper relationship with God." No. That is bovine excrement. Jesus went with him. He just asked, "Hey, come lay your hands on her." So Jesus said, "This is where I do my Forrest Gump imitation." Okay. And he just went with him. One of my missions in life is to at least get us to change the way we view God as this person that's withholding, this person that's so mysterious, and he has this plan that we can never know. And we always go back to Isaiah. His ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. Actually, here's Jesus, God in the Bible, showing you, "Hey, my daughter's dying. Come lay your hands on her." Okay. That's the posture of God. Now, things are going to happen on the way. And as I said last time, this is just interesting to people like me, we're about to see what theologians call a Markan sandwich. This is written by Mark, John Mark, and he does this multiple times throughout his book. He'll start a story, much like I do, then he'll leave that story and go tell another story. Then he will come back to the original story. He's making a sandwich. It's the thing in the middle that is the meat. This thing on the outside is pointing back to the thing in the middle. Okay? It's just a literary thing that he does. See how much you don't care? Look around at other people. See how they don't care. It's interesting to me. I could talk about, believe it or not, I could spend the next 3 hours to talk about Markan sandwiches. Why it's important. This is why I don't have any friends. Jesus went with him, and the people followed, crowding around him. Okay? You have to get that picture. It's not just Jesus and 4 or 5 dudes. It's Jesus and 837 people that all are trying to touch him. We read that before. People tried to touch him. They got their own problems. They don't care that Jairus' daughter is dying. I got my own problems, buddy. So anyway, a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, female issues. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. I'm going to pause and take a drink of this water. You can pause and do whatever you want. As I say often, smoke them if you got them. She'd suffered a great deal. She got no better. She'd gotten worse. Now, this is important. And we talked about this last time, and I'm sorry if you have to endure this twice, but she had heard about Jesus. Heard about Jesus. She'd heard about Jesus. What did she hear about Jesus? What? I'm going to take that answer. Judges, that he could heal you. But she heard something further. And I'm so glad you said that. I didn't plan to talk about this. There's not a Christian I know alive that will not say, God could heal you. Does God have the ability to heal me? Oh, yes, God could heal you. But she heard something else. She heard that people touch him, and when they touch him, they are healed. She knows something now about God's will. She heard something that made her change her mind about God. That here's a person, there's something different. I thought God was just too bad, so sad. But no, this person, if you can get to him and you can touch him, you'll be healed. So she came up behind him. You have to get the picture. Jesus is doing this. He doesn't walk like this probably. But Jesus is going this direction. And she comes up behind him. Let me ask you a question. Stop in the middle of the story. Does Jesus know she's there? No, he doesn't. Does Jesus know she's sick? No, he doesn't. Does Jesus know her story? Some of you think, oh, God knows everything. I'm going to show you. God knows everything. Jesus on the earth lays aside his privileges as God. And he's acting, he's demonstrating this is how relationship with God works. But he has power. Power is there. The power is just walking around. The power, Jesus isn't even doing anything with his fingers or lightning bolts. He isn't doing any of those things. He's just walking around and away from her and touched her. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Now, the New King James Version says it this way. For she, again, the cult thing, for she said. Now, this is where you think, well, Mark's gone off the deep end. There's so much here in the life of Jesus that I don't talk about because the churches I were involved in talked about it and they got really weird. And they pushed it to me, what I believe was an extreme. This will be chapter 4 in my book, Extremes. They pushed it to an extreme and they got really strange with it. And so I don't talk about it because I don't want to be classified with them. But I can't ignore that there's time and time again where something like this happens. For she said, if I can just touch him, I shall be well. The Amplified Bible says, for she kept saying, if I only touch his garment, I shall be, and I'm going to stop and talk about this, restored to health. Now, how many of you have raised in church? Sorry, I always ask this question. So many of us. Have you ever heard the term saved? Let's just stop and talk about it. What does saved mean to you? Or what does saved mean to whatever church you were in?
Conformity.
What?
Conformity.
Conforming? Maybe. But like, how many of you had some sort of situation where every head was bowed and every eye was closed, no one looking around? If they hadn't said no one looking around, I wouldn't have done it. But since they did, I had to peek. You just can't be telling me that. It's like put up a sign that says, do not touch.
Touch. Don't touch.
Well, I didn't want to. but now I do. So every head bowed, every eye closed, nobody looking around. If you died tonight, do you know where you would spend eternity? You're not guaranteed tomorrow. And they've told a story about a person that died in a car wreck or whatever. And so, but you can walk these aisles tonight, square your shoulders back and come down here and meet Jesus, and you will be saved. Ticket to heaven. What are you saved from? The fiery pits of hell. Death.
Well, you have to get saved at every meeting and every church camp and you have to get saved.
I've been saved many times, yes. I'm a multiple saving kind of person. Yes. What do they call that? What is the word? This will bother me. Habitual? I don't know. I'm a habitual, maybe that's not the word. But it's serial. I'm glad we thought of that. Thank you very much. I'm a serial salvationist.
And they keep going until someone finally gets up to do it.
That's right.
It's the church of the same 50 people who've been there for years.
See, this, you guys are helping me. You have to charge me for therapy. I got saved many times because I felt sorry for the guy who had said, I know God is speaking to someone. And then nobody's, well, I can't let all these people think that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll do it again. I'm a serial saver guy. I know the thing to do. Anyway, the word saved is a Greek word. It has been consigned, is consigned the right word? To an eternity thing. Christians have made everything about what happens when you die, where you go. If you got to do certain things, make certain decisions, understand things the correct way now, so you can live for eternity with God. And so salvation, being saved, is about eternity. But the word saved is used right here. In the original Greek, she said, if I can only touch his garments, I will be sozo. I'll be sozo. Of course, she wasn't speaking Greek. She was speaking Aramaic, but Mark is translating it into Greek. I will be sozo. Not so-so. I will be sozo is how you pronounce that. This word has nothing to do with eternity at all. In fact, I had a friend of mine, this is the reason I'm bringing it up. Ryan, if you're watching, this is your fault, who texted me and said, why do Christians always use this word to talk about being saved from hell or eternity when it means healing, being restored? And that's what it means. It means to save, keep safe and sound, to rescue from danger or destruction, to save one from injury or peril, to save a suffering one from perishing, one suffering from disease, to make well, heal, restore to health, to preserve one who is in danger of destruction. Don't you hate when people have a PowerPoint thing and they read every single word of it? To save or rescue. Almost everything Jesus talked about had to do with bringing, once again, God's will to earth, not getting us ready to go from earth to heaven. Christians decided, hey, how could we get this exactly backwards? I know, we could just talk about eternity. Jesus was constantly talking about, and actions that he were doing were leading to God's will that's in heaven being restored here on earth. And she said, if I can touch his garment, I'll be saved. But preachers want to say, yes, today if you'll come forward, you can touch the hem of his garment, and you too will be saved. No. She didn't care about eternity. She cared about, if this keeps on, I'm going to die. My family's going to be without me. That's what she was concerned about. The noun, saved, is a verb. The noun is soteria, in case you want to know. If you ever hear theologians or preachers talking about soteriology, again, these are things you don't care about. It's the study of salvation. Now, Paul said it this way, faith comes from hearing, okay? But notice this. Notice something. You've heard that. The way she got faith wasn't because she was special or God gave her something. She just heard something about Jesus, and faith automatically came. But you've heard this scripture before, if you're Baptist. If you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be what? Saved. Now see, you're still thinking salvation of your soul or your spirit and eternity. Because that verse triggers that. But that ain't what the word means. That's the same word, sozo. For it's by believing in your heart that you are made right with God. It's by openly declaring your faith that you're saying. The King James says, with the heart man believes, with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Something came into this woman with the issue of blood's heart, and she openly declared her faith. See, we have relegated, that's a better word than consigned, we've relegated this verse to getting saved in church when it's actually the way connection with God works in every area. If I believe something in my heart and I say it, sozo will come, which is health, restoration, well-being, the end of suffering. Okay, so I want to skip this. I talked about this last time. Oh, it's really good though. Okay, let's do this one. This is where we should do this toward the end anyway, because this is where people think that you're weird and that you're like Benny Hinn or something. I'm not like Benny Hinn. I won't push you over or even take an offering for that matter. So those are two ways I'm not like Benny Hinn. Benny, if you're watching, call me. We need to talk. So Jesus came to Jerusalem. Oh, it's not up there yet. So Jesus came to Jerusalem and went into the temple. You may have forgotten what we're talking about, but we're talking about the fact that this woman heard something and then she said something. Okay? She heard something, then she said something. Jesus has just come to Jerusalem. It was Palm Sunday, and they're raising the palms, and they're saying, this is our new king. And so he's just arrived in Jerusalem. He went into the temple, just like this. That's exactly how he did it. And after looking around carefully at everything, he left because it was late in the afternoon. Do you know I could talk about that verse I could do a 5-week series on that verse. Aren't you glad I'm not going to? But he goes into the temple and he looks around. This is Passover. And I've talked a lot about what really ticked Jesus off about what was going on. I won't talk about it today. But we see later he was upset. We're about, by the way, to eat another Markan sandwich. Okay? He returned to Bethany, which is a town, not a girl, with the 12 disciples. The next morning, as he was leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Why was Jesus hungry? He hadn't eaten anything. These are simple. I want you to point out, he's God in a bod. He's not doing this because he's God. He's doing this to demonstrate. He's about to show some really cool things that I won't be able to get all to it in the next few minutes. I'm going to give it my best shot. He was hungry. Could have been on a diet. I don't know. They didn't have to be on a diet. They walked 20 miles a day. They could eat anything they want, and they had no honey buns. These are the two things Jesus had. That's an advantage. He noticed, as he's leaving Bethany, a fig tree in full leaf a little way off. So he went over to the fig tree to see if he could find any figs. But there were only leaves because it was too early in the season for fruit. Okay? Jesus goes over. There's a fig tree. Oh, they don't have figs, just leaves. It was a tree that outwardly looked like it should have some fruit that would be beneficial, but it didn't have any fruit that was beneficial. Those of you that are Bible scholars and grew up in Sunday school where you had to do sword drills, what's Jesus about to do?
Get angry.
Well, yeah, after he deals with this tree, what's he about to do? What's the next step in this story? Where is he headed? Have you guys ever read your Bible? Do you have a Bible? We could pass out Bibles. What's he about to do? See?
Eat some figs.
No.
Somebody said it.
What?
Curse the tree.
No. What's he about to do after this? Where is Jesus? He's leaving Bethany, and he sees his fig. He's walking. Where's he going? The temple. He came to the temple the night before. And he looked around. He spent the whole night thinking about this, by the way.
Gonna go flip some tables.
He's about to flip some stuff, is exactly right. He's going to the temple to what we call cleanse the temple. He's not vacuuming. He's upset with some things that are happening at this Jewish expression, not just Jewish, it's God on the earth's expression, the way people think God needs to work. That's where he's headed. He's headed to the religious epicenter of the world. And he's hungry, so he stops by and he talks to a tree. And there's no fruit on that tree. Then Jesus said to the tree, "May no one ever eat your fruit again." They walked off. Oh, I could talk about this forever. It's so fascinating to me. And the disciples heard him say it. Okay? Now, I left out the part where he throws over the chairs in the temple and the tables. There's a reason why. But he's correcting. And he says, "My Father's house should be called a house of prayer." Prayer. The way you connect with God. The temple was supposed to be the way that it wasn't God's way of doing it. Jesus is coming to show God's way of doing it. But it's the best way that they had at the moment. It's the way that you were supposed to connect with God. And Jesus came in and it ticked him off what they were doing. That they could not, especially people that were far from God, couldn't get close to God. He said, this is supposed to be a place where you connect with God. And then he goes home. The next morning. So you get the picture? He cursed a fig tree. The next morning, they passed by. The Mark and Sandwich, and forget that, but Jesus is using the fig tree as an illustration of religion. That nobody's going to eat this fruit again. There's a new sheriff in town. There's a new way to do things. Empty, showing, looking like it's really good, but there's no substance there. I'm going to end that. But in the middle of that, he illustrates something about prayer or connecting with God. He said, my temple will be a house of prayer. The thing that he's doing with the fig tree is showing this is how prayer works. This is how connecting with God works. We want to bring God's will to the earth. It's not just about I was mad. He probably was mad. So he cursed a fig tree. But notice this. The next morning, as they passed by the fig tree, he had cursed. They're going back to the temple, by the way. What did Jesus do? Huh? Jesus is just going back to the temple. The disciples noticed it had withered from the root. Peter remembered what Jesus had said to the tree. And you know the disciples on the way were going, hey, John, remember he cursed that tree? Let's see what happens. John says, I bet nothing happened. Oh, no, something happened. So as they walked by the tree on the previous day, I don't have time to talk about all this, but look, Peter exclaimed, look, Rabbi, talking to Jesus. Here's where I always have to stop and say, what of necessity had to be happening in order for Peter to say, look? He wasn't looking. Aren't these questions easy, Greg? Greg's getting them all. He wasn't looking. Why does that matter? That's number one, what faith is. He said something, and it happened. This is how interaction with God works. He said it, and it happened. He doesn't have to look. But Peter, hey, look. It actually worked. And Jesus says this. And see, there's all kinds of things you can say about when Jesus first said it, the fig tree didn't, like the Wizard of Oz witch, wither and die in front of him. No, it looked just the same. But something had happened. Jesus said to the disciples, have faith in God. We're always wondering, what is faith? We're supposed to have this faith thing. What is it? Have faith in God. He's about to tell you what faith in God looks like. He demonstrated, he is saying, the thing that I did with the tree is faith in God. And I don't know why we as Christians, if someone says, what does faith in God mean? We'll come up with all kinds of flowery expressions. We'll come up with something that sounds philosophical and deep. Jesus says, what I do with the tree is faith in God. And I tell you the truth. I always pay attention when Jesus says, let me be honest. You can say to this mountain, may you be lifted up and thrown into the sea, and it will happen. Now, all of us, I'm sitting here talking about it. All of us go, no, it won't. You know what I mean? We think that. I understand Jesus probably doesn't mean, so you should go around rearranging the Rockies. I understand that. He's speaking metaphorically and hyperbolically. He's saying, here's a big thing here. It's not just about little fig trees. Here's a mountain. But you can say, may you be lifted to this mountain, up and thrown into the sea, and it will happen. Then he does this thing. But you must really believe it will happen and have no doubt in your heart. In other words, we learned this from Peter. You have to really believe that it'll happen and not change. See, we think doubt in my heart, oh yeah, that's where I miss it. I just don't believe. No, just don't change. Peter saw something and he changed. Jesus said, say it and don't change. The New King James Version says, assuredly I say unto you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed, be cast in the sea, doesn't doubt in his heart, believes that those things he says will be done. This is an ongoing principle. Do you believe the things that you say will be done? That's a place to get to. Where Jesus believed, if I say nobody's going to eat fruit from you, that's going to happen. Well, Jesus, it looks like nothing happened. Okay. But it will be done because I said it. Now see, this is where you get grouped with the weird people. But Jesus said it. And then he went on and he made it worse. He said, if you believe that the things you say will be done, you will have whatever you say. Okay. I have to go back and do this really quickly. Immediately, the bleeding stopped. You remember this story? You thought we'd never be back. And she could feel in her body that she had been healed. Jesus realized at once that healing power, again, see, the healing power was just sitting there. She didn't have to pray, Lord, send you. We used to sing songs in Pentecostal church, Lord, send the power. What a stupid song. What else is he going to do? Lord, send the power. I never called Laclede Electric. Hey, Chris Hendricks is in charge of Laclede Electric. Chris, if you could send the power on over right now, I'd really appreciate that. I need some power. Chris will say, well, I can come out and we'll set up an appointment to set a transformer, and then I have to do this. Just did this a couple weeks ago. You will have to dig a trench to the little meter that we put there and attach it to your house. Oh. So you can't just send the power? Well, I'm going to bring the power. It's right there. Healing power had gone out of him. He turned around and said, who touched my robe? Of course, the disciples said, what do you mean, who touched you? You have 893 people around you. Everybody's touching you. But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Here's what I want you to see. We think we have to talk God into something, that God has to move our direction. He has to do something special and send it. Jesus doesn't know she exists. He doesn't know what's wrong with her. He's not thinking about her. She hasn't asked him anything. She's chased him down. And she received what she needed because there's potential power there all the time. She just needed to touch it. Then the frightened woman, I'm sorry, I'm going too long. You can leave any time. The frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell. She told him everything that she had done. And then Jesus says this weird thing. He said, daughter, your faith, not my power. And it's impossible without the power. And that's where we spend a lot of time singing about the power. Oh, yeah, God's power, send the power. There's power, power, wonder-working power. We sing these songs. But Jesus didn't say a single thing about his power. The power is always there. To Jesus, the power isn't understood. Of course there's power. God is here. But your faith has sozo, made you well. She got saved that night. Or day, it's probably the daytime. She received healing. Your suffering is over. And we know that he doesn't mean you'll never suffer anything again. That's why I tell the story about Peter walking on the water at this moment, not walking on the water at this moment. But in this situation, you made a connection with God and power flowed to you and you were saved. You were healed. Just let me do this and then you can go home and I won't talk about this any of the rest of the year. You remember this guy? While he was still speaking, we went from one Markin sandwich to another, by the way. We did a Markin sandwich where we left the sandwich on the table and went and made another sandwich, and now we're coming back. I'm not sure this has ever been done. While he was still speaking, some people came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, the daughter is dying, and said, your daughter is dead. This is about as worse a situation as you can come to. Why trouble the teacher any further? This is everything. As soon as Jesus heard that word that was spoken, he didn't talk to those people. Oh, her daughter's dead? Or are you sure she's dead? He immediately has to get to Jairus. Don't be afraid. Only believe. In other words, don't change. If you won't change, whatever you said will happen. Because Jairus said, if you'll lay your hands on her, she'll live. That's all you said. We don't have any record of Jairus ever saying anything else. And I think it's not only important, it's vital that Jesus immediately said, don't change. Stick with me. Partner with me. We just had to stop with this woman here. She's doing good now. The same thing will happen. Just don't look at the winds and the waves. Don't look at what happened. Don't change. Immediately, he goes and prays for her. Took the child by the hand. What all did I talk about? Did I skip anything? It doesn't matter. Little girl arose. She arose. They were overcome with amazement.